our submissions, barring the questions that I may have to field from the commissioners.
And the questions that you have to field, you've already had, and you've dealt with them as I think best you could in the circumstances.
Thank you, Chair. There are those, a few of these that I must deal with. Chair, you'd recall there is also a suggestion, if not something higher, that Brigadier Khalid ought to have given a warning at copy 3. And it seemed as though it is a warning as contemplated by Standing Order 262.
Also, the suggestion is it should have been a warning as required by Section 9.2 of the Regulation Gathering Act. If he was going to embark upon a dispersal, as envisaged in the section, then it would seem that this is something that perhaps you could argue on. If you're not ready to argue on today, you can give us a note on it. But it is an issue that's been raised, and we certainly would appreciate assistance on it. Yes. Otherwise, it's not just the standing order. It also is whether, if he was engaged in a dispersal operation, a lot of people gathered on the copy, wanted to disperse them. Those who had dangerous weapons, they could then be seized because they, by the police under powers I take it the Criminal Procedure Act, they could be arrested actually for possession of dangerous weapons. But the first thing he wanted to do was a dispersal. And if it's correct that before you can exercise powers to disperse a gathering, you have to give a warning, then you would have to give a warning. Anyway, that's the issue. I don't know what the answer is. I would appreciate submissions on it. If you're able to give us them now, fine. If you give them to us later in writing, we would gratefully accept that.
Yes. Chair, perhaps a few submissions in that regard would suffice. Part of what triggers that inquiry is somewhat the fact that we are trying to distinguish Scene 1 and Scene 2 as if they are different operations. They are not different operations. We have, for convenience here, made them separate topics to be handled separately because it is easier to do that. But Brigadier Khalid was not involved in two, and his colleagues were not involved in two scenes. They were involved in one operation, which was the dispersal, disarmament, and arrest of all those armed strikers. And I should add to that, Chair, that whereas Regulation 9.2 requires section rather of the Regulation of Gatherings Act requires the warning. In this instance, the police did even more. They begged the people to disarm. They begged them to disperse. This is now on the other wild side of the spectrum. And even the begging and the pleading, and we see even Mr. Matunja go down on his knees.
Not exactly acting as a police agent when he did that.
No. He wasn't, Chair, and I'm not advancing that as an argument. I'm merely saying that if the law requires the police to act that way, is to clearly intended to say, make them aware this is what is required of you. And the police went beyond that point to say, we beg of you in many repeated ways, and did that with a loud hailer and said to them, please disarm and disperse. That didn't work. And in relation to copy 3, Chair, it was pointed out to me that the operation did not even stop at copy 3. There were further violent acts of damage to property that went on beyond copy 3 and where the police had to attend to it. So I don't know if the postulate is put that the incident should have been stopped at scene 1, whether the police, if told that we are under attack at K4, somebody would say, no, don't attend to it, we have stopped the operation. That would not be a practical way of dealing with things. There is also criticism about the use of specialized units in public order policing. The first response that we must offer as a submission in that regard is to say that if you are talking about public order policing incidents proper, and by proper I mean those that obtain within the constraints of the law, clearly that a recommendation to that effect is sound, but we need to be practical about this. We need to accept that we are not there as a country in our appreciation of the importance of law obedience, that a Marikana would happen. You would have, as my learned friend Mr. Berger would say, marauding individuals, heavily armed, who are bent on mayhem. What do we do there? And as we make the submission, Section 9.2 does tell us what we do if the criteria is met for the use of firearms and weapons. I'm also informed by my learned colleagues that I should draw the attention of the Commission to Exhibit Triple G4, page 11 of that exhibit. Page 12, I'm told, Chair.
A long time ago when we received that exhibit, can you perhaps just remind us what it says? I know we'll read it, but if there's a nice, clear passage that you can give us at the moment, it would help us.
It is
Triple G4, para 12.
para 12, line, page 12, line, from line 14. Where is it? Is it there? If we can go at the top of the right-hand corner of the page, it's a 681. 681. There in the middle, you would see, Chair, that General Mpembe says, and he's speaking to Mr. Matunjwa, no thanks, President. Are you saying tomorrow they will hand in the weapons, they will disperse? Says Mr. Matunjwa, yes, I mean, if you are inaudible, I said it clearly that we have been portrayed as AMCU as the union that is instigating violence all over the world. So denounce any end to violence if you are committing such. Please denounce. We do not want to hear any incident because all incidents that are happening around the area is reflected in audible. It is AMCU who instigates such a thing. So please, as from now, we do not want to hear anything about that in audible. Address you. Denounce violence, it means weapons, no weapons, and then get your mandate, give us what we agree, and people disperse. So we point to that very direct question by General Mpembe, are you saying they're going to disarm tomorrow? He says yes.
But he goes on, and he does seem to be saying effectively what he's going to say the next day. The speech he's going to make, as far as I read it, the sort of trailer almost of what he's going to say the next day. This is one of the passages that was referred to earlier, supporting the contention that Mr. Matunjwa gave a definite promise that they would lay down their arms. But there are other passages which go the other way, and General Annandale certainly said that he didn't regard what Mr. Matunjwa said as amounting to a definite guarantee, as an undertaking, that they definitely would lay down their arms. But this passage, I think, is support for the proposition that Mr. Matunjwa was very confident that they would. And he conveyed that confidence to the police. we know now with 2020 hindsight that he's confident he was overconfident. But certainly, to be fair to the police, they were told by a very confident Mr. Procedural that all would be well the next day. I think that's a fair summary.
We'll all be happy to tomorrow, words to that effect. I'm not suggesting that he gave an unequivocal undertaking that he will deliver that type of promise, clearly, but there was certainly amongst the police an expectation that might very well be a possibility of the people disarming voluntarily.
There's a further point in your favor on that point, I think, and that is, according to the evidence, it does look as if the police still labored under what I think one can now describe as a misapprehension, that all the strikers were really AMCU people, and even the NUM people were really more ex-NUM people than actual NUM people at that stage. And one sees interchangeably in the documents a reference to the strikers and AMCU. So if the police had been led to believe, I suppose by London, that the strikers were all really AMCU, and AMCU was substantially behind the strike, that would have encouraged the police to believe if the president of AMCU thinks that the strike's going to stop, or not the strike, but the weapon's going to be handed down, they will accept the instruction or the request from the president of the union. It's difficult to be overly critical of the police given the mindset they were in. It's difficult to be overly critical of the police for assuming that Matundu was right and that they'd all be happy the next day.
The one other aspect we have to address is, was Marikana an unprecedented event? You'd recall there has been a lot of controversy around that, and we have been told the May event of 2012 bears similar resemblance to Marikana, and that claim cannot stand. Well, firstly, the Lonmin security tells you, Chair, Commissioners, that they have never seen anything like that in Marikana, in Lonmin, not in Marikana, in Lonmin. And they have handled many unprotected strikes, and the security tells you, normally as a matter of course, if we stood up and said disperse, that is what would happen. It didn't happen on the 12th. So there is that evidence which we submit must bear weight to what the police are describing. There's also the evidence which has not been controverted, that the use of tear gas, which is the doctrine in public order policing, has never triggered an attack on the police on its use. Where strikers say, because you are throwing tear gas at us, that is the reason for us to attack the police. That's a separator as well, Chair. There is yet another separator. History has it, and the evidence has not been controverted, that the unfurling of a barbed wire as a defensive measure has never provoked the response that was observed on that day. And for that reason, it could not have been foreseen that its use would have the consequences that it had. Most of the time, public disturbance events occur as a matter of spontaneity when they begin to get out of order. They often start in a particular fashion, and then emotions go awry, and after that things may very well go wayward. But it is with some element of fluidity and spontaneity to them. What is different with Marikana is this is planned, it is militarized, it is by individuals who, even prior to the 16th, some of whom would have been associated with very violent deaths of policemen and of co-workers and of security personnel of lawmen. That's a separator. We have never had that type of thing in the past, says the police, and there is no reason to disbelieve them. That must trampoline me, Chair, to what must be my concluding submissions, unless... I'm pointed to also deal with the question whether as SABS we had taken an adversarial posture against Colonel Vermaak.
I'd also like you to deal, if you can, with the submission that Mr. Mpofu made, that it related to the use of the words engage. He said, I'm not sure I'm doing full justice to his submission, but as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter. He said, he referred to Brigadier Carlitz as saying, when he said engage, he was actually intending to speak to the POP people. This was then repeated by Colonel Vermaak, because he'd remember what happened the 13th, and he was afraid that they weren't responding. And what Mr. Mpofu said, as I understand it, was that by that time the POP people were all really in the Nyalas. And that was understood by the TRT people as being a command to them. And that was also part of the explanation for what happened. He then I think went on to submit that in fact the TRT people fired not so much in self-defense, or they thought was self-defense, but because they were obeying this command to engage, which they thought was addressed to them. I'd be grateful, again, if you're not able to deal with it at the moment, I'd be grateful to receive a note on that from you.
Chair, Captain Loost testified on the point that they understood that engage to an instruction to pop. They never responded to it as TRT members. So there is direct evidence that contradicts that argument. And also an appreciation of how this operation was to happen was clearly that the POP people were going to be responsible for the conduct of POP, and so too those of NIU would be taking instructions from NIU and STF, from people of STF. It was not contemplated that because you are the operational commander, Brigadier Khalid would be giving instructions to STF people to do A or B or C in relation to the event. It is clearly that they were going to act under the command of Gafli, who was in charge of them as STF. So it has to be understood in a proper context about how multi-units operate in a particular environment. Are we adversarial against Colonel Vermaak? Clearly not, Chair. There is Captain Baloyi who says things that are negative for SABS. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has been allowed to come and say what they have to say. And even Colonel Vermaak has not been able to say he was, one, precluded from to making certain disclosures, never went that far, and never went as far as to suggest that, on the contrary, he was advised to state an untruth. It never went so far as that, and we submit that it is not unexpected that in an organization that large, you would find people who hold disparate positions in relation to a particular matter. And Chair, when we don't address the question of incident 1 and 2, it's not because we abandon the fact that those incidents didn't happen. We're saying nothing turns on that. There is clear evidence that can explain events precipitating or the events immediately before the shooting happened at the Crawl, which bear no controversy around it, unless if the insinuation is you are lying to the Commission when you say they happened, in which event then we'd have to address a different matter. And I don't place so much weight to it because as we make the submission, Chair, I don't think the President is interested in questions of credibility. The President, in your report, is interested in understanding those issues that can help the government shape its policy and its conduct so that South Africa can avert Marikana 2. That's what is interested, what the President is interested in. If we are in a civil or a criminal trial and credibility issues were primary in relation to the adjudication of a particular matter, then I think my emphasis on whether or not this witness is credible and the other not would have been slightly different and slightly differently nuanced for that matter. If I was an owners-bearing party and had to rely on a particular witness to carry my case, it would have been different. I think this process is a slightly different one. My final remarks, Chair. Chair, it's very important for us as a country to understand the role of the police. And errant police officers do not belong in the South African Police Service, and there is no attempt on the part of at least us as a legal team on instructions that we have received to defend that. But it is very important for us also as a nation to understand that they are the only instrument under the Constitution who have a responsibility for the maintenance of law and order. And they do it under very difficult circumstances. It is blood-curdling, Chair, when Mr. De Rover says to us in 5 years we lose 880 members of the police service in the line of duty. It's a serious number for a country to sustain. And
doing quick sum of my head, it's over 120 a year. It's more than 2 a week.
Something like that, Chair. And it is people who our safety rests on. It is people who the law authorizes them to carry firearms and other weapons within the constraints of the law so that you and I, Chair, can have our law and order in place. And when we do judge their conduct, we should do that in deep appreciation of the special place they occupy. I'm not defending individuals, I'm defending the institution of the police service. And I'm saying whatever else we lose, what we should not lose, it's the importance and their centrality in the organization of our constitutional order. Those are our submissions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Semenya. Mr. Mr. Mpofu, you've got half an hour.
Chairperson, can I request that we take a short break so that I can discuss
Right,
the...
well, yeah, all right.
Sorry, Chair, we really don't have time for breaks at this stage. I would oppose a request for a break at this stage.
Look, we'll take a tea break later on, but we're going to stop at 1 o'clock. It's now 10:30.
Yes, well, that's the break, Chairperson, was actually meant to anyway, we can do it at the tea break to discuss with the evidence leaders.
We told you yesterday that you would have half an hour after discussions we had.
Yes.
I take it you prepared half an hour's worth of...
No, I haven't, Chairperson. Other things have just arisen now. That's why I wanted the break so that we can discuss the question of time allocation. Because there's more time now.
My fellow commissioners urged me that I should give Mr. Mpofu his 5 minutes, and so I do that.
Thank you. What? No, I need more time.
Everyone needs more time now.
No, there's not everyone. It's just you and I.
resumes. I understand the matter that you wanted to deal with in the adjournment has been successfully dealt with. Mr. Mpo.
It has, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
I take it Mr. Wesley is going to keep it.
Mr. Wesley, yes. I'm assuming, well, Chairperson, as matters stand now, I have 40 minutes. So what I would propose is that, because it's 20 to 11, we can go until 11, and then I'll do it in 2 installments.
What happens? What's going to happen at 11?
No, I was saying, depending on when you want to take the tea break, yes. I was proposing if you do it at 11, then I can break it into 2 installments.
Well, if you prefer that,
I
I personally would prefer to go on and then take the adjournment when you're finished. But obviously, if it will help you to help us more, then I will do it the way you suggest.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think let's leave it to me for now. Thanks.
All right.
So I might go for your option depending on. Chairperson, thank you very much. I'm obviously racing against the clock here. So what I'm going to do, Chairperson, firstly is to deal with the issue of concessions, real and otherwise, that have been spoken about. The first one is that Mr. Semenya somewhat has made my job easier because of what I will go as far as to call concessions that he has made. I'm sure he'll contest that. But in the absence of time, if I have to develop any of the points I'm going to make, Chairperson, then I'll leave it for the notes. So I'm going to be very cryptic. The first one is that Mr. Semenya told us yesterday that the conduct of the strikers was, he said treasonous. I'm sure he wanted to say treasonable. But it was treason. It amounted to treason. Now, Mr. Semenya represents the South African Police Services. So I'm sure whatever view he espouses here must be the view of his client. And you'll remember that I read out the extract from Colonel Scott that the chairperson helped me to find, where the similar sentiment had been expressed, that once they killed the police, then it was no longer about these small matters of killing non-strikers or enforcing a strike. It was now a challenge, to use Mr. Semenya's words and Colonel Scott, it was now a challenge against the authority of the state. And Mr. Semenya has said exactly the same thing. Now, that, Chairperson, is a crucial concession to make, because it goes exactly to what we have been trying to explain for 2 years, that these people were regarded as the enemy. We know what happens, what we should do. What should we do as a country with treasonable people who threaten the authority of our state? We must declare war against them. That is what our army is there for. And that is why, from the point, that's why we called the 13th a game changer. We've been calling it since the beginning until now. Because it was the point at which the whole business changed into war. And that is exemplified by many things which I don't have to go into now, what I call the frenzy of activity that followed that point. So from that crucial turning point onwards, we were no longer in the territory of just small matters. We were in the land of treason and war. Then the second concession, which is important, relates to what happened at Scene 1, where Mr. Semenya, in his address this morning, not yesterday, the treason was yesterday, refers us to the fact that the TRT formed a human block, and that's in relation to something else which I'm going to discuss just now. Well, it goes to a submission which I made on Wednesday, Chairperson, that if the TRT indeed made a human block, then we have this very simple situation. Whereas, in that gap, the TRT had the time, the means, and the wherewithal, and the regulations to boot, to prevent the further movement of the strikers by using barbed wire or by using a physical block of some sort with nyalas or whatever. They chose to have what Mr. Semenya has called a human block. But it was not just a human block of, comrades holding each other like this. It was a human block of more than 50 people armed with automatic or semi-automatic rifles. That's the difference. And therefore, that is also a very important statement to note. Which takes us, Chairperson, to the concessions that I was said to have made. I disowned one of them when we were talking now, and you correctly said I'll deal with it when I'm replying. Let's start with the question of premeditated murder. Let me firstly, I was not making any concessions on that question, Chairperson. I was simply saying that one of the theories, and I think I tried to explain this, it was a theory that I said against myself, I had not put to anybody, but it's one that I had just gained from reading and rereading the documents. And the spark was the reference by General Naidu, I think, to Section 49. That one of the theories that one could look at was that, Section 49, the reference to Section 49, but also Captain Lust's evidence that they were told to stand fast and not retreat and so on and so on. And I said one of the, and the fact that they straddled the road at some stage. I said one of those theories would be that at best for them, they were told that they must not allow the so-called militant group to pass through, and they must arrest them by any means necessary at all costs. That would still be unlawful because, remember, well, firstly, it would be illogical because there was always going to be phase 6 if they were so desperate to get those armaments. But you can't instruct people of that kind of, who are bearing those kinds of arms, to say to them, don't retreat. And that is where the trick is, Chairperson. Mr. Semenya tells us that why must we expect them to run away because their duty is to protect the state or whatever. Well, Chairperson, we must expect them to retreat because that duty to protect the state doesn't just lie on them. It also lies on the POP. And what did the POP do? They retreated in front of our eyes here on the screen. They retreated into the nyalas, and that was it. So if the TRT had done the same, instead of, I didn't understand the submission, whether they were protecting their egos or what. But they had exactly the same duty to retreat as the POP, which did in an exemplary way, which, by the way, was in front of them. So the POP would have been closer to the strikers than the basic lie. So their failure to retreat cannot be explained by this notion that what do we expect of them as a police force and so on and so on. Because whatever we expect of them as a police force applies equally to the POP. But the real point is this, Chairperson. even if you take that postulation, we have not excluded the issue of premeditated murder at all. But we have said, at the lowest, let's say that at scene 1, at the very lowest, there was dolus eventualis. And I don't have to go, Chairperson would understand what I mean by that, in the sense that they should have foreseen and so on and so on.
Not they should have foreseen. They should have foreseen but didn't, then it's culpable homicide, if it's a crime. For those when you ask, you have to say they did foresee, and they were reckless as to they proceeded with their conduct, were reckless as to the consequences.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes. But, Chairperson, I just want to point something to you. You will remember, if you look at our opening statement, whatever the exhibit number is, you will see that the 10 points that we made there, Chairperson, we differentiated between scene 1 and scene 2. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but we said at scene 1, there was murder, unjustifiable homicide. I think that were the words that we used. We said that there was murder there. And then we said at scene 2, there was premeditated extrajudicial executions. And that's where there is a subtle difference. The reason we made that difference, Chair, was because we had, in our consultations, it was clear that whatever had happened at scene 1, at scene 2, the killing zone and all what we know about it, the fact that no warning was given, the fact that the people were surrounded and trapped there, I think the way I put it to Brigadier Kalitz, again I'm paraphrasing, I said to him, apropos that question of why they were not warned, I said, look, you had these people surrounded, I said, you had these people surrounded, yes. I said, underneath them there was the earth, the ground, yes. On top of them there were helicopters flying, yes. So there was nowhere to go. And yet you didn't even say to them, and we've had that discussion on Wednesday, and so on and so on. And from that, just from that point, it was clear that the executions, as we call them, at scene 2, were definitely premeditated. But now here's the thing, Chairperson. Here's the thing. You see, you are permitted as commissioners, in my respectful submission, to say, if indeed there is prima facie evidence that what happened at scene 2, as we claimed in our opening statement, was premeditated and cold-blooded executions, and you would be fortified in that belief by the evidence of Mybeck, whatever problems at the lower scale of reasonable suspicion, that he could not have made up this, what he said he had, someone saying, these people deserve to die. There can't be a better description of an execution than that. But if you put all those things, and even at a prima facie level, accept that what happened at scene 2 were cold-blooded executions, then, Chairperson, you are quite entitled to extend that to say, well, as Mr. Semenya has said, it was actually one transaction, one operation. The fact that here, for argument's sake, we divide it up is just here and neither here nor there. Then you're quite entitled to say, well, if it was execution at scene 2, it must have been execution at scene 1 as well. Because if it was indeed one transaction and one thing, you'll remember this kind of logic I used, I'm just digressing a little bit, when we were talking about the planting of weapons. I can't remember which witness I was cross-examining, but I said to that witness, look, if you are coming to this commission and giving us the excuse that the reason you were removing these weapons was because the medics were asking you to do so, then since we know that you removed weapons at scene 1 where there were no medics, then surely that could not have been the reason. And there was a long debate about it. But it's that kind of thing. Because if you're going to lie about something regarding the one scene, but somehow it doesn't fit on the other, then at worst, it must be assumed that the non-applicability doesn't apply even where it, to the naked eye, might be seeming to apply. So that's our submission on the question of premeditated murder. We're not excluding it exactly because in fact, at scene 2 we're alleging it. But at scene 2 we're alleging executions. At scene 1 we're not excluding them, but at scene 1 we're prepared to accept, for the sake of argument, that dolus eventualis might have been. But that's not a concession that we make, that there was no intention to kill them. More so, Chairperson, the other concession that we certainly do not make, which I'm glad the Chairperson alluded to it because it gives an opportunity to deal with it, is that the people were not killed because they were striking. We certainly do not make that concession. Why? Because I said it on Wednesday. What were the first words? As the Chairperson said, the words that were said to the world by General Mbombo: today we are going to end the strike. Today we are going to end the strike. That, and Mr. Semenya actually said this. He said, whatever, when you're asking him about what was discussed at the NMF, whatever they discuss can't be inconsistent with what General Mbombo told the world the following day. What did General Mbombo tell the world the following day? Today we are going to end the strike. So whatever they discussed at the NMF must have had something to do, on Mr. Semenya's formulation, must have had something to do about ending the strike. And we know, and that takes us to the next point, Chairperson. You, sorry, Chairperson.
Sorry, you understand you correctly to say that it may well be, I don't know, you're putting your eye on that what is being concealed in relation to what happened at the NMF was there the decision to break the strike, which would have been an improper decision.
That's correct, Chairperson. In fact,
that's revealed, as it were,
yes,
by the remark that the provincial commissioner made in the ENCA interview.
Yes, Captain Adriao and all, and the D-Day and so on.
No, not the D-Day.
Okay, well,
the breaking the strike.
This was only General Mbombo.
The provincial commissioner said, you know, I think it was after the press conference, she had an interview on ENCA. We saw that video clip and she said it then. She did say, of course, that it was a slip of the tongue, but she also conceded that she had nothing to correct it in the period thereafter. That's correct.
Yes, Chairperson, actually you took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say, we, at least you and I, Chairperson, in our debate on Wednesday, and I think you repeated it this morning, said very obviously something is being concealed about the discussions of the NMF. One can't put it higher than that. Otherwise, really, why would you be fed with evasive written answers and all that goes with it? The so-called pedantic detail theory of the National Commissioner. But now we're getting closer to what that something was. That something, surely, we speculated the other day, we said it was something political. I said maybe it's a pressure of the minister. You said maybe it's the Malema issue. Doesn't matter. It could be both. It could be one of them. But that something must have been A, political, B, unlawful, and C, something that was at all costs supposed to be concealed from this commission. And it must have had something to do with breaking the strike. And we know how far that chain can go. So it seems clear now that for political reasons and you must also read that whole statement that I've just made together with the blatant untruthful evidence of the National Commissioner around whether the minister was told that stage 3 was going to be gone into, and so on and so on. That retreat, which is clear from the minutes, which Annandale has agreed is what happened, is what was said, that the minister was told about stage 3, which means he knew what stages there were. And he must have known that the stage 3 is the tactical stage. And that's why the retreat was done here and in Rustenburg. It would mean that there is another intention to hoodwink the commission into minimizing the role that was played by the senior political people. And that alone, as the chairperson says, in the Zafet's law of evidence, the chairperson will be familiar with this. It said that if you are lying, it doesn't necessarily mean you are guilty. But if you are lying, as the chairperson put it better than me, it points the arrow. It can point the arrow at something else that you are concealing, and that can be debunked with these or decoded with these submissions that I've made. And that brings again the link between the political pressure and what actually happened on the 16th even closer, because the strike, properly so-called, was not a business of the police.
What goes against that? I must confess this is a matter that caused me a lot of puzzlement. What's against that is you have the very proper approach of General Mpembe on the 13th saying, we just want the weapons, lay down the weapons, we're not going to arrest you, carry on. And I think Lieutenant Colonel McIntosh did something similar to the strikers when he negotiated with them. And even the plan, now, unless one accepts it's a trap, which I don't think is suggested, what the police intended to do was to disarm these people, disperse them by the non-lethal methods and so on. That was apparently going to happen, unless we suggest that's the total. We accept that's just a total pretense, but I don't think that can be suggested. So if they dispersed them and disarmed them, then it wouldn't have followed that the strike would have been broken. It might be that the strike would have been more difficult to enforce by the militant strikers, because they wouldn't be able to use violence and intimidation to the same extent. But if that had been done, the strike wouldn't have been broken. So I've been puzzling for a long time about how those items of evidence which tend to point one way can be reconciled with the statement that the Provincial Commissioner made. It's one of the mysteries. Maybe we'll find the answer, but it is a mystery, I'm afraid.
Yes,
certainly everyone, I think, would agree, and Mr. Semenya would be the first to concede, I'm sure, that it wouldn't have been a proper approach for the police to throw its state-provided force into the scale on behalf of Lonman to break a strike.
Yes.
That's a matter between the employer and the employee. The police have got no business with that. Their job is to maintain law and order.
That's correct. Thank you, Chairperson. And then, while I'll move on to something else, I hope that that mystery will be resolved when the commissioners deliberate in less pressurized conditions than I'm operating under now. Then again, Chairperson, just to touch on this comparative analysis between Sin 1 and Sin 2. Sin 2, in a strange way, also provides us with the answer to the putative self-defense issue. Because there's no such, nobody, it would be laughable if anybody would suggest putative self-defense in relation to Sin 2 and the killing zone and so on and so on. And therefore, if it was not putative defense there, if they shot people knowing that they are not being attacked, then we can certainly infer that at scene 1, it was also not putative self-defense. I won't put it higher than that. Again, it's the one transaction theory which I advanced earlier. So, Chairperson, I have an obligation to do this because yesterday, I don't know how many times we must say this. There has never been any suggestion that the injured and arrested or any of the parties who represent the other victims have said that the deaths that occurred on the 16th are more important or whatever was being suggested by Mr. Semenya yesterday than the 10 deaths that preceded them, or the 7 non-striker deaths, because we know that the 3 were strikers. That has never been our case. It will never be our case. If any,
it could scarcely be. You never said it. See, if you had said it, I'd have been down on you like a ton of bricks.
Again, Chairperson, you take the words off my mouth. It's written here. I've said, if any of us had suggested any such thing, I'm sure we wouldn't have finished the sentence, because the Chairperson would have.
Semenya suggested it actually, but anyway,
well,
if there's a perception around
it
that,
must die.
You were more interested. Well, those are your clients, of course, were affected, but that somehow those deaths are on a higher scale than the others.
Yeah.
If that's a perception anybody has, it's a wrong perception.
No, it's very wrong. Yeah.
I'm not sure Mr. Semenya said it, but it doesn't
well,
matter. If there's a perception, it's no longer there.
It's no longer there.
Perception.
Yes. What is happening in this commission, Chairperson, and I'm glad my learned friend Mr. Tip, at least, has joined us on the side of people who are saying, if anybody, whether it's a member of NUM, whether it's a striker, whether it's AMCU or whatever, is implicated in the gruesome deaths that preceded the 16th, those people must be found, tried, arrested, and locked up in jail for the rest of their lives. There should be no doubt about this. So, that, the only people in this room, Chairperson, who do not take that position are the people who are guilty of murdering these people. That is SABC and Lonmin. Because Lonmin says, charge all the people who made all this gruesome, dastardly, what, except us, Lonmin. We are innocent. SABC says the same. Charge everyone, it's bad, gruesome, look at this picture. They're all killed except us, SABC. We are not saying that. We're saying charge even ourselves if we're. And that, Chairperson, if you take from the biblical example of the wisdom of Solomon, you will know who is the guilty party among those people. One does not need Solomonic wisdom, as Holmes J.A. once said, to work out that one. The people who are playing holy are the guilty ones. Now, the next issue, Chairperson, is also, I just want to say this, I have to say this. It does not matter, Chairperson, it does not matter how morally reprehensible the actions of the strikers were. We all agree it's gruesome. We just have to look at the pictures. But in this country, Chairperson, we have decided that the death sentence has been abolished. And what this police did, because they felt that their fellow policemen had been killed, they sentenced these people to death and executed them. The executions in this country are not allowed, even if they were judicially sanctioned, let alone extrajudicial executions that were committed on the 16th. So one doesn't have to doubt the moral reprehensibility of what was done, but it cannot deserve the firing squad that the world saw being meted out against our people on the 16th. Now, the other thing I just want to touch then, Chairperson, on the what I've called the 3 game changers. Maybe we could take that break now, just so that I can isolate them, because just 3 broad points, but I can split them up into.
How long are you still
About
still have-
let's say 15 minutes, Chairperson.
Well, let's check with Mr. Wesley. How much time has he still got, Mr. Wesley? How much?
11, Chair.
11. All right, we'll take the 10-minute
I want to
adjournment.
say that Mr. Mpofu's unique contribution to this, not his only contribution, but a unique contribution to the work of this commission is the ability to make 13 minutes become 18 and 17 become 42, and I think we should all thank him for that.
I'll accept that, Chairperson,
It's
as a
11.
compliment.
We're busy with 11. All right, let's have a 10-minute adjournment now. And then he's got 11 minutes, and then Mr. Chasselson and you, Mr. Butler, have the rest of the sitting until we adjourn.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Commission resumes. Before Mr. Porter continues with his address, I've been asked to address two requests to the members of the public who are present in the auditorium. The first relates to the headsets that you all have this today. I'm asked to ask you please to leave them here in the chamber, and they will then be collected, returned to the contractor. The other request relates to a headset that someone was using yesterday and didn't hand in. So there's one headset short. I'm quite sure it was taken through inadvertence, but I'm asking the person concerned to please bring it back, because otherwise the department is going to have to pay for it. So the 2 points: one, leave your headsets in the chamber today, and two, the person who took a headset away yesterday, please bring it back and hand it in so we don't have to pay for it. Then I'm asked to make an announcement that the Human Rights Commission, as it's one of its contributions to the work of the Commission, has arranged for a photograph of all the council legal representatives, plus the commissioners, to be taken at the end. And apparently we're all going to have to be here at the front, and some kind photographer is going to take a photograph or photographs. So just after we adjourn, I hope it won't take too long, but just after we adjourn, the photographs are being taken, and it's, as I've said, it's one of the many contributions the Human Rights Commission has made to our procedures. Then finally, before we carry on with Mr. Porter, I'm told that Mr. Bezos, who I think can be described as the doyen of human rights lawyers in South Africa, who, as we well remember, has made a contribution to our proceedings as well. Unfortunately not here today, but I asked Ms. Wilden please to convey a message of congratulation. I think I can take it upon myself to speak on behalf of us all, to convey to him our very sincere congratulations on the attainment of the 87th anniversary of his nativity. It's his 87th birthday today. We're very happy for him. We wish him all the best. We hope he has a great day, a wonderful year, and many happy returns with good health all the way. So please, would you convey that message to him as well? And I think we can possibly give him a round of applause for his real good family. Mr. Mpofu.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm glad that Mr. Bezos' birthday coincides with day 300 of this commission, Chairperson. Chairperson, I just want to, with the very limited time I have, I'm just going to touch on very quickly. One is Commissioner Hemraj had asked me about a reference of what Brigadier Kellitz's responses were when I asked him about the no warnings, particularly at scene 2 rather. It's on page 20534. That's just one of the answers. Line 14 to 25, day 173, where he said there was no time or no chance. Geen kans. That's in 1, which is nonsense. And then at the other quick point which I wanted to make, Chairperson, is that just to agree with Mr. Semenya, a learned colleague, on his analysis of if there's going to be an inquiry into the fitness of office of the National Commissioner, which we also advocate in our submissions, one should not just look at Section 8, as such as said by the evidence leaders, but also Section 9 of the Police Act. Actually, the inquiry is probably better placed at Section 9, but there's no harm in looking at both reading Section 8 with Section 9. And then I just want to make this point to round off the point I was making earlier about the death sentence. That I'm told, and I won't say this under oath because I have not Googled it myself for now, but I'm told that, incidentally, after the death sentence was abolished in England, it was reserved for another 40 years for treason. So, is that correct? Yes. In South Africa, it's abolished completely. But
Completely.
yes, but except when it's war, when there's times of war,
No, there is a,
when the constitution is suspended. Yes.
there is an exception.
Yes.
That is the exception.
Yes. Well, yes.
But that exception wouldn't apply in any.
Yeah. Yes. But that just shows you then it means the South African police services were using the English system. Now the next issue, Chairperson, is that I just want to deal very quickly with matters that deal with the game changers. The first one is an issue that you canvassed with my learned colleague, Mr. Tip, about the crucial matter of whether or not the strikers were armed when on their way to the NUM offices on the 11th. It's a very important issue, Chairperson. We can't brush it off. I would have thought that the analysis made by Mr. Gotts of the Kasim rush, so to speak, would have put that matter to rest. But insofar as it didn't, your Chairperson must also take into account the fact that there's actually evidence, oral evidence of Mr. Mabuya Kulu, who was a very good witness, that they were not armed, which was not challenged. In fact, when it was challenged, it provided one of the most interesting moments in this commission, because Mr. Semenya played the video saying, you can't be serious, look at that video. And it turned out to be the video of the NUM people.
Unfortunately, we haven't got a video of the, for reasons that...
Yes, it was the NUM people who were walking, and then that was clarified.
We've only got the after the incident
Yes.
video. We haven't got a prior one, and that was canvassed. And
Yeah. No, all I'm saying is that the
attempts were
video...
made to explain it.
Yeah. No, all I'm saying, Chairperson, is that insofar as Mr. Mabuya Kulu was challenged, it turned out that he was being challenged with the wrong video of the NUM people who were assaulting him. He even said, I can even see my stick there. One of them has taken my stick. And then, of course, the evidence of what the strikers kept on saying near the railway line and everywhere, that the reason why they went to arm themselves. And Mr. Gegeleza, by comparison to Mr. Mabuya Kulu, Chairperson as a witness, it would be like comparing a Mercedes-Benz to a Volkswagen. He was a very unsatisfactory witness. One of his highlights was that the armed people of NUM only carried one stick and one spear or something like that, on which I cross-examined him. So the commission must make a finding that Mr. Mabuya Kulu's evidence that they were in the same way as they were on the 10th, in other words, not armed except for their sticks, that should be the basis, and that the whole, whatever follows then with the game changer, then I've already argued. The next one is the game changer 2, Chairperson, which is what happened on the 13th. Very, very important. 2 points. One is a point that was debated between my learned colleague, Mr. Semenya, and Commissioner Tokota. And that question is a lingering question of if, as I put, I think it was Brigadier Khalid, where I said, what was the attack? What was the attack? And he said, well, it was the crouching and the singing and so on. If that is true, then as Commissioner Tokota put it to Mr. Semenya, which I don't think was answered properly, why did, under the exact same conditions, did firstly they not attack the 5 or 7 policemen who were standing in front of them, at least one of them we can see on the video, who I think I put the distance in the end to about 2 meters or so between them and the strikers. But more importantly, going to putative self-defense, if those policemen did not believe that because those people were crouching and singing and so on, that it constituted an attack, how could the ones of the 16th believe the same thing? So that does away both with the putative self-defense, but also what I call the mirroring of the two scenes. But more importantly, Chairperson, about Game Changer 2 is the following fact. And it goes back to this issue of the execution and the death sentence meted out against the strikers. Because remember, our case is that the motives that were at play here, paramount among the police was the revenge motive, which we've spoken about. And with Lonmin, it was making money and saving the NUM. But as far as the revenge motive is concerned, Chairperson, ask yourself the following rhetorical question.
You've got 5 minutes.
Yes, I have a stopwatch, Chairperson. And I have Mr. Wesley. Ask yourself the following question, rhetorically, Chairperson. If the police, if the members of SABC were prepared to kill, to murder a general of the police, one of their own, because of what happened on the 13th, if they were prepared to kill a general, how much more about the people that they thought were the ones who had murdered their colleagues? I'll leave it at that. If they were prepared to kill a general, no less than a general, their leader, the chief of the JOC, they were prepared to murder him, you can imagine what their feelings were against the strikers. Then, Chairperson, let's go to the last game changer, which is the political motive. I just wanted to add one more. You and I, Chairperson, I was giving you the factors which would point to what I'm hoping would be a finding, that the discussion at the NMF at least included the political considerations. One of the things I wanted to add to that list, Chairperson, is the evidence of Mr. Derova. Mr. Derova said that an operation of this kind, in his expert opinion, could never have been carried out without the political sanction from above. Now, all of us have said that. I've said that, and so on. The importance about the fact that it comes from Mr. Derova is that Mr. Derova is the police expert. He's the SABC expert. It was not praised, not Mr. White or Mr. Hendricks or Mr. Mpofu or whatever. He is brought here by SABC, and he says there is no way that a operation of this type could happen without a political say-so from above. So there is no ground upon which the commission would not be entitled.
It also said the approval from the executive and the judiciary. So that indicated to me that the political setup to which he's accustomed in the Netherlands isn't the same as ours.
Yes. Yes, anyway, that's akin to a declaration of war, which we say this was. But Chairperson, what I want to end with this. When I asked the people I represent what should be the final message to the Commission, what came out were the following, what I would call warnings that they were giving, but I'll change them into pleas, because I don't think I'm in a position to make warnings. But they said, please, Chairperson, whatever you do not insult the intelligence of South Africans and the people of the world. Please follow the requirements of your job. You and the evidence leaders are supposed to be the only non-partisan people here. To be impartial and to do your respective functions without fear, without favor, and without prejudice. Secondly, please do not ignore the obvious as to what was being concealed at the NMF meeting. We've already covered that. And then please do not condemn the victims and insult them with the theories such as the Muti theory. And apropos what Mr. Semenya was saying about these beliefs, I can refer him to the oxymoron of a holy war. Even people who believe in other religions sometimes use those religions either for defensive, for creating defensive curtains. Even prayer is used for a defensive curtain. And then they said, Chairperson, please do not expect that any of the players here did not foresee the possibility of deaths. As Mr. Jamieson, I think, considered, it was put up by Mr. Gotts, and as is implied in the concessions made by Mr. Ramaphosa. Everyone foresaw the possibility of death. And then the last one was, please don't try to, I know I have half a minute here. Don't try to whitewash powerful politicians at all costs, or do what I saw this morning, Chairperson, to round off that submission. Most of us who watched television yesterday would have seen some of the scenes that will probably have a negative effect into the future of our democracy, of police storming into storming into parliament. But that is not what I want to talk to you about. I wanted to end my address by quoting what one of the members of parliament said there, Mr. Naren Singh of the IFP. He said to those people, do not, in the name of protecting one man, you are protecting one man, he said, but opening a wound in our nation that will bleed forever. And that is a plea that we would put to this commission, or a warning or a plea that our job is to make sure that this does not happen again. And that as humanity, as South Africans, although the Deputy President said that we are collectively guilty, we reject that. But we say that we are collectively victims, both as all of us as South Africans are victims, all of humanity are victims. And you must remember that, Chairperson, as from today, all of humanity will be under the slogan that says we are all Marikana. So we accept collective victimhood, but we reject the collective responsibility. The responsibility must go where it rests, to those people who instigated and made sure that our people are mowed down and executed in cold blood. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Mr. Shasta.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to, Mr. Butland and I are going to split the reply. I'm going to try to address very briefly 7 issues. The first is what should be done about the fact that no visible policing was put in place in response to Brigadier Engelbrecht's intelligence report of 11 August. The second is Lonman's...
What was the first one?
What should be done about the fact that no visible policing was put in place in response to Brigadier Engelbrecht's intelligence reports? The second is Lonman's complaints about the Phase 2 case against it. The third is AMCU's submissions about dangerous weapons and the criminal law. The fourth is SABC's contention that the JOC didn't know that the operation was continuing from scene 1 to scene 2. The fifth is what one can infer from the post-mortems in relation to the presence of muti marks on the victims of the 16th, and what inferences may and may not be drawn from that. The sixth is to clarify our punitive recommendations, and the seventh is to respond to the issue in relation to the terms of reference and our submission that there should be an inquiry under the SAPS Act into misconduct or the fitness of office of the National Commissioner. Now, if there's time after Mr. Budlander's submissions, we'd like to show a presentation that we prepared which identifies with photographs the exact place where 41 of the 44 victims died between 12 and 16 August. It's 41 out of 44 because in respect of 3 of the victims who died in hospital, Warrant Officer Lapaku, Mr. Sakhalala and Mr. Nswele, we can't find conclusive photographic evidence or video evidence which shows the exact point that they were killed. We thought that the presentation would be an appropriate...
Where they sustained the fatal injuries.
Oh, indeed, where they sustained the fatal injuries. We thought that this presentation would be an appropriate presentation to use on the last day of the Commission to remind ourselves what we've been doing for the last 2 years. There may be time to do so. If there isn't, we will circulate it to the parties and make it available to you and your commissioners so that it may be of assistance to you in preparing your report.
Perhaps it could be put on the website as well as the Commission.
Chair, it's not the sort of material that should go on the website because the pictures are particularly gruesome and To start then with the issue of the intelligence reports from Brigadier Engelbrecht, it was raised in our primary argument by Ms. Pillay, and she made the point that Brigadier Engelbrecht reported to Major General Mpembe on 11 and 12 August about imminent attacks on NUM and on the workers at K4 and the need for visible policing. Two separate reports. Now, Major General Mpembe says he was on leave and handed the matter over to Major General Naidu. Major General Naidu claims not to remember receiving any SMSs or telephone calls from Major General Mpembe in this regard, either on the 11th or the 12th. If I can give you the references, it's day 198, 24278, line 14 to 24279, line 6 in respect of the 11th, and 24274, line 20 to 24275, line 25 in respect of the 12th. And we know that SAPS did not implement a visible policing strategy on the weekend of 11 and 12 August, and that there were tragic consequences for Mr. Fundi, Mr. Mabalani, and Mr. Mabebe. I leave Mr. Langa out of that group because I'm not sure that SAPS's visible policing strategy would have had the effect of saving him. It may well have saved Mr. Fundi, Mr. Mabalani, and Mr. Mabebe. So somewhere from Brigadier Engelbrecht through Major General Mpembe to Major General Naidu and then on to the operational members, the communication chain broke down. And SAPS failed to take action that may very well have contained the situation at Marikana before it spun out of control. Now, in our submission, this is a very...
I'm trying to say, even if one puts out of the reckoning for the moment the intelligence that was communicated to General Mpembe, there was, of course, a plan in place which provided for the establishment of a JOC, which wasn't implemented. Major Govender it dealt with visible policing as well. Major Govender was to be the official in charge of that. He wasn't even informed of the plan, according to that.
Indeed, there are two separate breakdowns. The one is the specific intelligence in relation to an attack on the NUM office and K4.
There's 2 points.
And the separate is the second is the failure to implement the plan. We've addressed the failure to implement the plan at length, but in relation to the failure to act on the intelligence, the failure of SAPS as an institution to act on the intelligence of Brigadier Engelbrecht, in our submission, it's a very serious matter. And it seems from the evidence that it was either Major General Mpembe or Major General Naidu who was at fault in this regard. That's what the evidence suggests. We can't say who. But we would ask the Commission to recommend that the issue be investigated further by SAPS itself, because this is a matter for disciplinary proceedings, for further investigation and disciplinary proceedings. Somebody failed to do a very important job, and a job which may have saved people's lives. It's for SAPS to find out who that person was and to take the necessary action. If I can then move to the Lonman case on Phase 2. Now, Lonman asks you not to make any findings against them in relation to the failure to discharge their social labor plan housing obligations. They claim the issue falls outside your terms of reference. They claim it would be substantively unfair to them to make any findings against them because the housing problem is a problem that government should be dealing with. They claim that even if they had built the 5,500 houses, it wouldn't have made a difference because it would have made no material change to the housing backlog faced by their employees. And they claim it would be procedurally unfair to them because they say they had limited time to address the Phase 2 issue and they were only able to put up one witness. The only thing that they don't claim is that they actually fulfilled their SLP housing obligations. There's not an oversight on their part. They don't make the claim because it's manifestly unsustainable. They must always have known it was an unsustainable claim because when they finally got their opportunity to put up their one witness to speak to the merits of their defense, they chose Mr. Sedat, who on his own admission has no personal knowledge whatsoever relevant to their SLP obligations. So instead of a witness, we got a spin doctor, and that is in fact what happened. Now in argument, they continue ducking and diving to avoid the merits. Now, we'd urge this Commission not to let them get away with this, and we'll take their evasive complaints one by one. The terms of reference complaint is a red herring. The Chair's ruling makes that clear. There couldn't ever have been any reasonable doubt that the failure to address the housing issue, quote, created an environment conducive to the creation of tension, labor unrest, disunity among its employees, or other harmful conduct. It's not a test for legal causation in relation to deaths. It's a test about the creation of an environment conducive to the creation of tension. But even if there was some doubt, that was actually removed by the one piece of evidence that Mr. Sedat actually was qualified to give on the basis of personal knowledge, namely that the Lonman Board itself recognized that the tragic events at Marikana were linked to the critical shortage of decent housing for its employees. That was Mr. Sedat's evidence. And the reference is in our heads. It's day 292, page 38355, lines 4 to 21. So that's the terms of reference complaint. It's not fair not to look at government complaint is a non-starter. In an ideal world, your Commission would have been able to investigate the failures of government and to make recommendations in this regard. And we don't for a minute suggest that there haven't been manifest failures on the part of government. But the amendment of the terms of reference changed that. And it leaves your...
In fairness to the President, when he... we'll quote this in the report. When he wrote to me to tell me that he was changing the terms of reference, taking out 1.5, he did indicate it might be necessary at the end of our work to reconsider that and to have some kind of investigation, some form, into the issues raised by the deleted 1.5. So it's not something that has necessarily disappeared from the radar screen forever.
Indeed, but where the situation now is, Chairperson, is that your Commission has a legal duty to perform the function that has been assigned to it in accordance with the reduced terms of reference. And it would be an unlawful abdication of that function to decide you won't investigate Lonman, which you're asked to investigate, because you can no longer investigate government. It would in fact be unlawful. Then we come to the it wouldn't have made a difference argument. We find that in Mr. Berger's address on day 296, page 38993, lines 3 to 17, and I'd like to quote it. Can I then conclude on this issue by the counterfactual? Assume for the moment there's going to be a finding. Assume for the moment that we're going to be criticized in a vacuum. What's the counterfactual here? Because then the Commission will have to address the reality. What if 5,500 houses had been built? What effect would that have had on the tragedy? Remember, we employ 28,000 employees and we've got 10,000 contract workers. Let's forget about the contract workers. Sensible concession. And think away that the government should provide housing to them. Not just the government, their employers. But of the 28,000 we've employed, we've now built houses for 5,500. What about the other 20,500? In fact, the argument, the arithmetic's wrong, it would have been 22,500. Is that going to take away their complaints? Is that going to create trust between the employer and the employee? I wouldn't have thought so. Let's step back from this argument and just look at it, because quite a breathtaking argument for Lonman to make. It amounts to an argument that Lonman has been so neglectful of the housing needs of its workforce that the 5,500 houses in their SLP would have been no more than a drop in the ocean of squalor in which they expect their workers to live. That's what the argument is. Well, Lonman may have been bad, but it wasn't that bad. The figures that Mr. Berger quoted to you are actually incorrect for two reasons. First is they conflate the total workforce with a number of migrant workers in categories 4 to 9, which is the real inquiry, migrant workers. And second, they ignore the houses that were already available for Lonman's category 4 to 9 migrant workers, either through hostile conversion process or through housing developments undertaken by Lonman prior to 2000. Now, we've prepared a table which we have circulated by email and given in hard copy to Lonman and made available to you and your commissioners, Chair. It's table 1, which shows the correct figures on the basis of Lonman's own documents with the sources. And there we see that the total number of category 4 to 9 employees was 23,044, not 28,000 quoted by Mr. Berger. that the total number of these workers who were in decent housing by 2012 was 5,883, which was 25%, 1 in 4. The total numbers not in decent housing by 2012 was 17161, 74.47%, 3/4. We then look at what would have happened if Lonmin had delivered. It would have created another 1130 on outstanding hostel conversions and another 5,497 houses. That's the 5,500 minus the 3 that they managed to build. That would have changed the situation. So instead of 25% of the workers in decent housing and 74% not in decent housing, you'd have had 54% in decent housing and 45% not in decent housing. Now, in our submission, it would have been a very material difference. It's not just that more than half the migrant workers would have been in decent housing. It's also that the remaining 45% would have seen that their employer was in the process of addressing their living conditions. Instead, 3/4 of the migrant workforce was living in squalor, and Lonmin had done nothing about it for more than a decade. In fact, they'd compounded the problem by pushing 7 out of every 8 hostel residents into the informal settlements. So it very much would have made a difference, is our submission.
The suggestion that they had a choice, they didn't have to take a living out allowance, they could have taken advantage of accommodation provided by Lonmin. But when I asked Mr. Sedat how that would work in practice, he wasn't able to explain how such a choice could have been exercised. What
Indeed, Chair,
there was apart from the living out allowance?
Well, Chair, it wasn't possible because there wasn't any available housing. That leaves the procedural fairness complaint. It can be easily addressed. First of all, it's grossly overstated. Lonmin has had Dr. Forrest's preliminary support since 15 August. That's more than a month before Mr. Sedat testified, more than 2 months before they filed their reply to that preliminary report. So they can't complain that they didn't have a proper opportunity to assemble a rebuttal of the complaint against them. If they had an answer, they had the time to put it forward. But if you're still concerned about procedural fairness, we'd point out that with the exception of paragraph 26 of our heads of argument, which refers to a DMR report, every submission in our heads of argument is based exclusively on legal instruments or Lonmin's own documents. So it's either a proclamation or the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, or it's a document from Lonmin.
The DMR document they had already,
no, they got through us, but they didn't have independently. But we'd invite you to ignore paragraph 26. If they didn't have enough time to consider this document in the 2 months since they received Dr. Forrest's report, we don't need to depend on it. If you read our heads on the basis that we found our submissions exclusively on legal instruments and Lonmin's own documents and the testimony of Mr. Sedat, you'll see that Lonmin has no complaint about unfairness. And what you'll see from the heads, and it's in the heads, I'm not going to take you to them in any detail, but paragraphs 14 to 22 show that there was a clear obligation on Lonmin to build 5,500 houses between 2007 and 2011, and Lonmin was at all times aware of this obligation. Paragraphs 23 to 27 show that they managed to build only 3 of the 5,500 houses they committed to building, and that failure was the product of a unilateral repudiation of their original obligation. Paragraph 29 shows that their complaints about delays in proclamation are spurious. Paragraph 30 shows that their complaints about affordability are irrelevant because the SLP obligation was a binding legal obligation under the Act. So affordability didn't enter into it. At best, it gave them an opportunity to approach the department for a variation. But paragraph 31 shows that in any event, the budget for the entire program could have been funded by a reduction of less than 20% in the $607 million, and I emphasize dollars, not rands, that Western Platinum paid in dividends to Lonmin and Inkwala over this period, or a reduction in the 1.3 billion rands payments that Western Platinum made to Lonmin and its Bermuda subsidiary over the same period, ostensibly for marketing services that the figures show cost considerably less than half that amount. So the money was there, it was just sent elsewhere. So we would urge this Commission to find that Lonmin was in clear default of its housing obligations under the SLP, and to ask that this finding be brought to the attention of the DMR. It's for the DMR to decide what, if anything, to make of it, but it does need to be stated and it does need to be brought to the attention of the DMR. That brings me to the issue of dangerous weapons at a gathering. AMCU submitted that the mere carrying of dangerous weapons at a gathering was not a criminal offence prior to the post-Marikana amendment of the Regulation of Gatherings Act. That's incorrect. Section 2.2 of the Dangerous Weapons Act empowered the Minister to prohibit the carrying of dangerous weapons at gatherings by means of a notice which would specify the category of gatherings and the category of objects which were to be treated as dangerous weapons.
That section in operation in August 2012?
The section was in operation, and the notice that was made under it is Government Notice 1633 of 1 October 1996. 1633 of 1 October 1996, which prohibited persons from being in possession at any time, at any gathering, at or in any public place, of any object belonging to a class type that was specified in paragraph 2 of the schedule. And that paragraph includes spears, assegais, nopkiris, pangas, knives with blades longer than the list is long. And so any person carrying one of the objects at a public gathering in Marikana was guilty of an offence, and we don't retreat from our submissions in this regard in paragraph 1336 of our heads. We do, however, need to add to those submissions in two respects, and they're two important respects. The first is it's not only the strikers who participated in armed assemblies during the week of 9 to 16 August 2012. Exhibit quadruple Z 6.27, which is the videos taken by Lonmin Security on the afternoon of the 11th of August, show a group of NUM supporters marching triumphantly around the Wonderkop Hostel complex with dangerous weapons in the afternoon of 11 August. Now that's a long time after there may have been any need to defend themselves from any attack that may or may not have taken place in the morning.
Are the hostels a public place?
The hostels, I would submit, would be a public place for these purposes. And we would submit that if the laws in relation to armed assembly are to be enforced against the strikers, they must be enforced against the NUM supporters too. The second is a more complicated submission, and that is that despite our belief that this country must stamp out armed assemblies, and that is a submission that we regard as very important, armed assemblies have bedeviled political life in this country since, well, a long, long time back. They were responsible for literally thousands of deaths in KwaZulu-Natal in the 80s and 90s. They've been responsible for deaths in labor unrest right through the period of the 80s and 90s, and they continue to be responsible to deaths. We do not retreat from a very firm submission that they must be stamped out. We do flag a concern that there is a risk that the fragile peace that prevails in Marikana could be disturbed by mass arrests for possession of weapons in gatherings in August 2012, particularly if they're perceived to be arrests effected on a partisan basis or for an ulterior purpose. How to assess that risk and what weight to give it are matters for the discretion of the NPA. We would merely ask the Commission to identify that risk in its report and to emphasize that whatever decisions are taken in relation to the prosecutions for contravention of the laws relating to armed assembly, those decisions must be taken on an even-handed basis. If they're not taken on an even-handed basis, it would really make matters much worse in Marikana rather than better. Then there's the suggestion.
Good. Another thing that can be done, and I don't know whether you're going to deal with it, and that is what I called earlier when you went in the chamber, the Mpembe plan, that apart from arresting people for what happened, as far as in relation to dangerous weapons assemblies, if existing dangerous weapons in the possession of people of Marikana can be seized by the police, then presumably some of the the dangers would also fall away.
And maybe that a possible recommendation in this regard is the suggestion of some sort of amnesty for a surrender in return for surrender of weapons. That is something that might be a way of addressing both issues. But the one principle that we would want to come out of this commission is that going forward, armed assemblies have to be treated ruthlessly. The suggestion that the JOC was unaware that the operation was proceeding. In his argument yesterday, Mr. Semenya suggested that there isn't evidence that the JOC was aware that the operation was proceeding to scene 2 after scene 1. Now that, with respect, is not correct. The transcripts of the radio transmissions make clear that anyone in the JOC listening to the radio after the scene 1 shootings would have been aware that the operation was proceeding and that SAPS was still trying to remove strikers from a copy. We've prepared a timeline of the relevant transmissions in Annexure 2. The crucial points, and that's extracted from the transcript of the consolidated transcript of the radio transmissions. The crucial points in the timeline are first 15:53:50, which is marked in red at the top, which is when the scene 1 shootings take place. Then there's the item in yellow at 16:04:04. The times on the left are the ETV times. The times on the right are the times of the video, or the times of the cell phone. When Brigadier Pretorius sends her text to IPID calling them to the scene and saying, having operation at Wonderkorp bad, bodies, please prepare your members as going to be bad. That is the earliest point at which the JOC can be said to have known about the shootings is, of course, at the time of the shootings themselves, because of the evidence of Mr. Boertes and Captain Kidd that it was audible on the radio. The second point is 16:04:04, by which stage Brigadier Pretorius knew that it was going to be bad. That is, in fact, before she received the telephone calls from Captain Lust. The next marker in this timeline, which is in red, if we scroll down, is the 27 seconds between 16:08:50 and 16:09:17, which is when Mr. Mkonjwa becomes the first victim to be shot at scene 2. So that's the point at which the first victim is shot at scene 2. And then at the end of this timeline, 16:19:47, Mr. Mpumza, the last victim to be shot at scene 2, to be killed at scene 2. Now, we've marked the transmissions in between, and we'd invite, I don't want to spend much time on it now, we'd invite you and your commissioner's chairperson to look at them, but by the time that Brigadier Pretorius sent her text to IPID, there were at least 10 radio communications that would have made clear that the operation was continuing. 7 of them would have suggested that the water cannon was still needed, so that, and you can infer from that the crowd hadn't dispersed. 2 of them would have alerted the JOC to the fact that the water cannon was needed in the vicinity of a kopje. Before Mr. Mkonjwa was shot and after Brigadier Pretorius's text, there were at least another 12 communications which showed that the operation was continuing. Several of these would have made clear that SAPS were engaging the strikers in a kopje. Shortly after Mr. Mkonjwa was shot, the JOC would have heard a report that there were 2 bodies, one of which was him, behind the second kopje, and I emphasize the second kopje. And after that report and before Mr. Mpumza was killed, there would have been at least another 9 reports that would have indicated to the JOC that the operation was continuing, and several of these reports would have alerted the JOC to the fact that more shooting was taking place. So we submit that the JOC was aware that the operation was continuing, that it was continuing in circumstances where what had happened at scene 1 created very real risks for what was going to happen at scene 2. Keep me honest on time. The post-mortem evidence and Muti marks. Mr. Nsebeza cited some statistics from the SAPS table in Exhibit KKK 10 in relation to the presence of fresh muti marks on the victims at scene 1. Unfortunately, that SAPS table is not entirely accurate, so we prepared our own table with reference to the post-mortem reports in Exhibit A with the correct statistics or the correct details and fully referenced. I want to emphasize that the evidence leaders are of the view that the evidence of fresh muti marks on accused persons cannot be used to infer an intention to attack the SAPS, because muti is at best neutral in this regard. Some people taking muti may have been wanting protection in the industrial dispute, as Mr. Mpumza suggests. Mr. Nzuza suggests. Others may have been wanting protection from SAPS not because they intended to attack SAPS, but because they'd already seen on the 13th that SAPS had killed some of their colleagues. Others may have been intending to attack SAPS and may have wanted protection for that. But at best, it's neutral. So I want to emphasize our submission that fresh muti marks don't themselves provide evidence of an intention to attack SAPS. Having said that, the Commission must reach whatever conclusion it's going to reach on the basis of the correct facts in relation to fresh muti marks, and they are the ones that are set out in the table. What I would indicate quickly in relation to the table is we've distinguished between scene 1 and scene 2. We've identified the position at scene 1 and in scene 2 where the relevant victim was killed. We've got a column that says were marks fresh or recent, and you'll see that in seven of those entries there is a question mark because the report doesn't specify. What I'd like to point out in that regard is that it's not a coincidence that all 7 come from 2 doctors who consistently don't distinguish between fresh or old scarification marks. So the fact that there's no mention of fresh scarification marks is not an indication that there weren't fresh scarification marks. It's a reflection of the fact that the 2 doctors don't distinguish. And we've given the references. Over the page there are 2 more entries in respect of the 2 victims who we cannot place, Mr. Sakhalala and Mr. Nswele. Those are the correct facts. I do want to emphasize again that our primary submission is whatever the facts show are neutral in relation to an intention to attack.
I wanted to ask you about that. What is the significance, if any, of muti marks, recent muti marks, scarification marks? I take it would be a basis for suggesting that at worst for the strikers concerned were minded to attack the police who wanted to be invulnerable and so forth. It would tend to support the submission that there was an attack, or more accurately, there was an original intention to attack or possibly to attack. If, of course, that then brings us to the next question, was there actually an attack? Now, there were threats, and there is, however, an argument that whatever threats there had been, when at the crucial moment there wasn't an attack, and the argument would be that that was because if there was going to be an attack, the intending attackers repented and decided not to attack. They realized this matter was more serious than that. So if there, in fact, at the end of the day, one was a whole, and obviously one of the matters we've got to give careful consideration to, that there wasn't in fact an attack, what might be based upon the argument that if it is a correct argument, that there wasn't an incident 1 and there wasn't an incident 2, and the analysis of that final video that was produced. If one concludes that there wasn't an attack, whatever the intention may have been earlier, then how relevant is the muti evidence?
Well, it ceases to have relevance. If the conclusion of intention to attack, then the muti evidence takes the matter nowhere.
And if there was an attack, even if the question as to whether there was an attack or not, the muti evidence would obviously be relevant and have to be considered.
Yes, say for our submission, is that one is that Muti could reflect one of three possibilities, or
I'm
possibly other possibilities that we haven't thought of.
I'm putting it at its highest.
Chair, then to come to the punitive recommendations, the first is to emphasize the additional criminal investigations we mentioned in our oral arguments, but are not in our heads, because we don't want our heads to be treated as the laundry list of the only investigations. And there are two that spring to mind. The first is the investigation of SAP shooters who've not provided statements which provide a satisfactory explanation for their shooting at scenes 1 or 2, or in respect of whom there's objective evidence that their shooting was unjustified. The second is the investigation of NUM supporters who can be seen with dangerous weapons in that group that I've just discussed on the 11th, on the afternoon of the 11th. Now, through the main body of our heads of argument, we've also identified a range of instances of misconduct on the part of SAPS. We haven't consolidated them in our concluding section on punitive recommendations. We'd merely emphasize now that we don't want them to be lost in the wash. Wherever we mention in the main body of the heads that a SAPS member should be investigated for misconduct, we stand by that submission, and we just also make the obvious point that where we've recommended a criminal investigation into a SAPS member for misconduct, we'd also recommend that SAPS be instructed to investigate.
It would be helpful if you could provide an omnibus note collecting all these references for us. Save us the task.
We will do so, Chair. That
such revised submissions as you are making now in this area.
We will do that, Chair. That leaves the issue of the inquiry in relation to the National Commissioner and whether this falls within your terms of reference. There are 4 issues, one of which is a non-issue. What's the correct provision of the SAPS Act is the first. Is it within your terms of reference? Is it fair to the National Commissioner, and are there grounds for an inquiry? The non-issue is Section 8 or Section 9. We concede that we've got the wrong section. It's Section 9. Section 9 is an allegation into misconduct or unfitness. The terms of reference question we would submit answers itself in terms of Clause 5 in particular, which says, the Commission shall, where appropriate, refer any matter for prosecution, further investigation, or the convening of a separate inquiry to the appropriate law enforcement agency, government department, or regulator regarding the conduct of certain persons. And we would submit that that would embrace an inquiry under Section 9 of the SAPS Act. Then there's the question, is it fair to the National Commissioner? And I don't fully understand the argument. She's known that her conduct was going to be scrutinized with a view to potential criminal liability or further inquiry in terms of Clause 5 of the terms of reference. Several parties have been making submissions that she should be investigated for murder. We don't know whether the Commission will or won't accept those submissions, or culpable homicide. But it's not clear to us how she can complain if the Commission concludes that her misconduct fell short of that which would justify a murder investigation, but still amounts to misconduct of the sort that might justify her dismissal and so requires an inquiry in terms of Section 9. The issues in relation to the National Management Forum, what happened at the National Management Forum, and what SAPS's response to that was, have been very fully ventilated in this Commission. There could never have been any doubt on the part of the National Commissioner that this was something the Commission was taking very seriously. Now, some people are saying that must be referred for prosecution or for investigation with a view to prosecution. We're saying, at the very least, it must be referred with a recommendation that an inquiry be set up in Section 9.
What do you say about the changes between the report that was sent to the President and the media statement that she made on the morning of the 17th?
That too, we have concerns about. and we make the submission in our heads of argument that those changes seem to have emanated from her office. She was certainly aware of the changes.
About them. And she didn't pretend, to be fair to her, she didn't hide behind anybody else. She said, I accept responsibility and so forth. And of course, if she'd read the report that was sent to the President, and that was the nature of the information she had, then when she'd applied her mind in the light of that information to the statement that she was going to make, it's arguable. It's not for us.
Well,
she might have seen the difference.
We would submit that she should have seen the difference, because there is a very big difference. The one speaks about two separate incidents, one of which is quite difficult to explain, or both of which are quite difficult to explain, but one much more difficult than the other. And the other just speaks about one incident. But
yes, another point. In the context of natural justice, if we were to suggest, I'm not saying we will, but if we were to suggest an inquiry be held, she would have the opportunity to make representations to the relevant authority, the President in this case, as to why an inquiry shouldn't be held. So I would have thought that there wouldn't be a problem in relation to natural justice. She doesn't have to be heard by us before we make the suggestion. The difficulty would relate, as far as she's concerned, possibly to the holding of the inquiry, but that she'd be able to address before the inquiry is authorised, if it is authorised.
Indeed, Chair, it's quite an astonishing natural justice argument, because it's a suggestion that there should be a hearing before there is a hearing about whether there is going to be a hearing. Because, of course, the ultimate hearing, if there is going to be a hearing, is going to be the inquiry itself. So there is...
She'd have the opportunity. She'd have the opportunity to say there shouldn't be a hearing because there isn't a basis for it.
Yes, but that's a hearing before the President, not before the Minister, not before this Commission. Then the last question is, are there grounds? And we would stand by what we say in paragraph 1302, amplified by the exchanges that we've just had in relation to the press statement. But when I went back to 1302, I realized to my shock that we hadn't emphasized the actual facts of what her role was at this extraordinary session of the NMF. We'd focused more on the cover-up than on what had or hadn't been done. Because whatever her role was, she was party to a decision that in our submission was a reckless decision that left 34 people dead the next day. And because of her evasive attitude at the Commission, we don't know whether she drove that reckless decision or whether she was a passive party at the extraordinary session. We don't know that. But her role in the attempted cover-up of the decision, coupled with suggestions of improper political considerations on her part that are reflected in the transcripts of the Provincial Commissioner's speech, meeting with Lonman on the 14th, suggests that she may well have been a primary player in relation to that decision. Either way, there are grounds for a misconduct inquiry. Our submission is that the SAPS should not be led by someone who, on the best version for her, was party to a reckless decision that left 34 people dead, and then participated in an attempt to cover up her involvement in that decision. So we stand very firmly behind the submission that there should be an inquiry in terms of Section 9. Chair, I've reached the limit of what I think I can do without interrupting or taking away from Mr. Budlander's time. If there is time at the end and we can get to the presentation that we've prepared, we will ask leave to do so.
I think it might be convenient for us to have a very short comfort break at this stage before we have Mr. Budlander argument. Commission resumes. Yes, Mr. Budlander.
Thank you, Chair. There are 5 matters which I wish to address. The first is Lonman's defence that it was not under a legal duty to negotiate with the strikers. The second is Lonman's decision not to close down its mining operations during the strike. The third is Mr. Matunjwa's account of his meeting with Mr. Kwadi on the 16th of August. The fourth is a brief remark on the question of a memorial, and then I have some very brief closing remarks I wish to make. So firstly, as to Lonman's defence of no legal duty to negotiate, a large part of Lonman's submission was that it was not required by law to negotiate with the strikers. It says that the Constitution and the Labour Relations Act and its own internal protocol did not oblige it to do so. Now, in fact, they are wrong in respect of the Constitution, because the Bill of Rights operates horizontally where appropriate, and there can be no doubt that the right to life binds and obliges an employer to do whatever it reasonably can to avoid the loss of life by its employees. It was a breach of its constitutional obligations. But in any event, the argument misses the point, because the Commission's terms of reference require it to inquire into and make findings and report on and make recommendations concerning, amongst others, the following matters as in relation to Lonman. 1.1.1, whether it exercised its best endeavours to resolve any disputes which may have arisen, industrial or otherwise, between Lonman and its labour force on the one hand and generally among its labour force on the other. Not a question of whether they had a legal duty to do so, whether they used their best endeavours to resolve the dispute. Secondly, you're required to report on and make recommendations on 1.1.2 whether Lonman responded appropriately to the threatened outbreak of violence which occurred at its premises. Appropriately is not just a matter of legality, it's whether it did the right thing. Thirdly, whether it employed 1.1.4, whether it employed sufficient safeguards and measures to ensure the safety of its employees, property, and the prevention of the outbreak of violence between any parties. Not a question of legality, question of whether it acted correctly. 1.1.6, whether by act or omission it directly or indirectly caused loss of life or damage to persons or property. And Chair and Commissioners, that goes to the point which we made at the outset of our submissions. The question is not just whether Lonman, or for that matter other parties, are legally liable for what happened. It's also whether they exercised their best endeavours, to use the words of the terms of reference, and whether they acted appropriately to use the terms of reference. That's what you are mandated by the President to consider. And it's no answer to say, well, I didn't have to act appropriately because I wasn't legally obliged to act appropriately, or I wasn't obliged, I didn't have to use my best endeavours because I wasn't legally obliged to use my best endeavours. The answer is then you didn't use your best endeavours. Mr. Berger asked repeatedly, where does the duty arise from? Well, we say that the duty arises, whether or not it's a legal duty, it arises from the duty of a responsible employer to act responsibly and to act appropriately where there is a risk of the loss of human life. It is a duty not to say, well, 44 deaths gave us good reason to negotiate outside our structures and to be flexible, but 10 deaths weren't enough. 10 deaths do not give us reason to be flexible. Only 44 deaths give us reason to be flexible. That's not what a responsible employer does, and it's not an appropriate response.
Is it relevant that they were requested by the police? The police came to them, they invited the police in to help. The police came to them and urged them to negotiate. Is that relevant on this part?
Well, that's very material, of course. Very material. If they're told, please negotiate, and they say we won't, all the more reason. Lonman's other explanation for not...
Sorry, one more point before you move on. We've had a bit of an argument here as to what exactly negotiate means, but I'm not sure that it's necessary for us to go that far. Did they have to negotiate or just talk?
They had to do was to talk to the people about what their complaint was and what their demands were, and to try to resolve the issue. Now, whether you do that by a process of full-on negotiation or you do it by other means is a matter which one has to decide. If if you like, in terms of situational appropriateness. But the one thing you can't say is we won't talk to you. We refuse to talk to you because of a principle which Mr. Da Costa admitted led to a completely cynical outcome, was a refusal to talk at all, because they said, we'll only talk to you through the people whom we know you're at war with. That was utterly cynical. Mr. Da Costa acknowledged that, and that's not what a responsible employer does. Lonman's other answer, the one answer is we didn't have a legal duty. The other answer is that they couldn't negotiate because the miners were inflexible about the 12,500, and therefore there was no point in talking to them. Now that is firstly not founded in fact, and secondly it's frankly absurd.
That's mainly ex post facto. There was no
That's-
basis. Sorry, are you going to make that point? I won't say more.
That's precisely the point I was going to make as to why it's not founded in fact. It's not founded in fact because at the time of the events, Lonman had no information at all that the strikers would not budge on a demand for an immediate payment of 12,500 rand. There was no such evidence of that kind before it. Subsequently, we have witnesses who came here subsequently and said that, and there's a lot of debate about that. But at the time when they refused to negotiate or refused to talk, they had no information which suggested that talking would be absolutely useless unless they paid 12,500 rand the next month. And so it's factually unfounded. It's an ex post facto rationalization. Secondly, it's absurd because everyone knows, even I know, that people often make very large demands as a starting point, and very often they say we're intransigent and we won't budge, but they do budge once talking and negotiations take place. That was Mr. Ramaphosa's evidence. I know that as having been an employee in a small non-governmental organization. Everybody knows that. People make demands, and when you talk, they moderate their demands. One can reasonably expect that the management of the world's third largest platinum miner knew that. And if they didn't know that, they had no job managing that company. I don't believe that's the case. They knew it. They knew full well. When you talk, things shift. Then I want to address two matters where it appears that Lonman is in any event legally liable. The first matter is Lonman's decision not to close down its mining operations. Now, in his evidence on day 289, Mr.
Again, please clarity. Close down the mining operation, you mean put it on care and maintenance?
Yes, yes. I'll come to that. Thank you, Chair. In his evidence on day 289, Mr. Sidas addressed the issue of closing the mine to avoid further loss of life. He said, you can't simply switch off and close down because there are certain essential services, maintenance services, which have to be continued for safety and other reasons. And that apparently involves something less than 10% of the workforce at most. And the evidence is at page 37794 to 37796. The problem with Mr. Sidat's evidence is that it's both theoretical, it's purely theoretical, and B, it doesn't answer the question. It's theoretical because he wasn't on the scene at the time when the decision was made to continue mining operations full on. He arrived later. He doesn't say, and he can't say, why the decision was in fact made. But you do have evidence about why it was made, and that was given by Mr. Mokoena, and I'd like that on the screen because it's a critical passage in the evidence. It's day 292, and it's page 38211. And I'm starting at line 17. Yes, thank you. So Mr. Rampele is questioning Mr. Mokoena, and he says at line 17, so it was known, will you agree with me, that it was known to Lonman that there was danger for those employees who were to report for work? Mr. Mokoena, that is correct. Mr. Rampele, it is also correct that in your recruitment you recruit a large number of people coming from very distant places, and they have to find accommodation in neighboring villages. Is that correct? That is correct. Mr. Rampele, and that if these people were going to work, and if you just look at this paragraph, if they were going to be going to work, they would face the same violent action by those who did not want them to go to work. Mr. Mokoena, that is true. Mr. Rampele, and that it was a known danger, that Mr. Langer, on his way to work, would in all probability, if he were to meet the strikers, would be faced with the same fate of these people that were injured on the 10th. Mr. Mokoena, that is correct.
This, of course, was the wrong date. But
yes. Mr. Rampele, And therefore you would agree with me that not informing Mr. Langer that he should not come to work because of the circumstances was something that one can call irresponsible. Mr. Mokoena, that could be the case, Chair. And then he goes on to explain why the decision was taken. This is the evidence of the decision which was actually taken, not Mr. Sidat's subsequent spin on the decision that was taken. If I may say, one of the options that actually we considered was to close the mine. And we deliberated extensively and looked at what that could mean for employees who then we would have to pay because they had absolutely nothing to do with the strike. So it was a matter that was discussed extensively. Let's close the mine. The question then was, if we close the mine, the workers who are not on strike have to be paid because they're not on strike. And we realized then that it was going to be very difficult to determine who was actually on strike and who was not on strike if we were to pay people after closing the mine. Further, we also looked at the issue that if we close the mine, continue paying people who are not striking, the likelihood would have been, why would anyone therefore go back to work if they're paid? Because there is an unprotected strike. So it was a complex issue, Mr. Chair. I want to admit, however, that it was a consideration on our part actually to close the mine as a tool to avoid further damage. So they closed what actually happened is not what Mr. Sidat says might have happened. What actually happened is they considered closing it. They debated it intensively, and they said, no, we are not going to do that because we don't want to have to pay wages to strikers, and we don't want to have to pay non-strikers for not coming to work. That's the reason. That's the decision. And so Mr. Sidat's explanation of the essential services didn't even arise. They didn't even consider whether they should keep the essential services going. That was not even up for debate. They said we won't close.
Presumably if they kept the essential services going, they had a much smaller workforce, much easier to protect them on their way to work and way back.
Yes. Mr. Chaskelson points out, and under those circumstances, if they said we are keeping the essential services going just to keep things afloat, there would have been no incentive for anyone to attack the workers because there was no production taking place, no smoke from the stacks. It would have just been a safety operation. So a cold and deliberate decision was made by Lonman to instruct people to come to work, knowing that they might be killed. And the reason that decision was made was because that would be in Lonman's financial interest. And we say with all due consideration, that was a cynical and in fact appalling decision. The managers, in the comfort of their offices, deliberated intensively and decided for financial reasons to instruct their employees to come to work, knowing that this would put their lives at risk. And the results were predictable, as Mr. Mokoena acknowledged. The decision was not only cynical and appalling, it was also unlawful if you read the judgment of the SCA in Media 24 versus Problo. The deaths of Mr. Mabebe and Mr. Langer were the direct result of the decision of Lonman not to close down the mine or put it on a maintenance basis. They were the direct, predictable, foreseeable, and unlawful consequence of a decision by Lonman. And the law is quite clear. If you can't provide a safe workplace, you may not tell your employees to come to work. It's as simple as that. Lonman also failed to comply with its legal obligation to provide adequate security for its security staff, adequate protection for its security staff. The security staff said, please buy some hard vehicles. Lonman said, no, we're only going to provide soft-skin vehicles. But whatever the merits of that decision, it didn't prevent Lonman from saying to its service provider, Protea Coin, please provide hard-skin vehicles. And in fact, there was a hard-skin vehicle initially. Could we have a look at exhibit quadruple Z 6.23.068? This is there's the vehicle on the 9th of August, 2012. It's a very large, very intimidating hard-skin vehicle owned by Protea Coin on the 9th of August. Now, apparently that vehicle was burnt out, but there's no explanation for why Lonman didn't say to Protea Coin, that's what we want at the very time when it was most needed. It was there when it was not most needed, and it was not there when it was most needed. That brings me to the third matter, which is Mr. Matunjwa's account of his meeting with Mr. Kwadi on the 16th of August. I need to reply to the submissions on behalf of AMCU in that regard. In our heads of argument, we submitted that initially Mr. Matunjwa gave a false account of what had happened during his meeting with Mr. Kwadi on the 16th of August. And in response, Ms. Barnes, on behalf of AMCU, argued firstly that Mr. Matunjwa couldn't have been expected to give a detailed account of such an informal meeting in his statement, and secondly, that in any event, he was consistent in his testimony that AMCU wanted to negotiate in an ad hoc central forum on behalf of the strikers. But we submit that's not the evidence. Firstly, in his statement, Exhibit KK, Mr. Matunjwa describes the meeting with Mr. Kwadi in some detail in 3 paragraphs. He doesn't refer to the demand that Lonman recognize AMCU as a bargaining agent before he goes to the mountain to try to persuade the workers to return to work. And that was very material, because if Mr. Matunjwa had demanded this because he needed something to take to the strikers and he didn't get it, then his need for it and his inability to obtain it were very material to the events which were followed, and one would expect them to be in the statement to say, actually, I knew I was going to have trouble persuading the strikers. I tried to get something to take to them, but Lonman was hard-headed and wouldn't give it to me. Then secondly, during his evidence-in-chief, Mr. Matunjwa gave a detailed account of his discussion with Mr. Kwadi, and again didn't mention this in any way. And then thirdly, he was cross-examined on this by Mr. Berger. It's day 24, page 2551 from line 11. I'll just read it. Mr. Berger puts to him, what you wanted to get from management is an undertaking that if the workers go back to work and there's going to be a discussion on wages, you want to be part of the discussion. Mr. Matunjwa says, that's your opinion. Mr. Berger says, no, I'm putting it to you as a fact. And Mr. Matunjwa answers, that is not correct. Mr. Berger says, and you said to management on the morning of the 16th, don't be technical with me, meaning don't refer me to bargaining structures. If these people get off the copy, I want a seat at the table. And Mr. Matunjwa said, where is that, sir? Can you give it to me? And then it was after Mr. Matunjwa had been shown the transcript of 0013, he conceded that he had sought this undertaking from Lonman. So his evidence initially was not correct. I do, however, want to record something publicly in this regard. I want to record publicly that this in no way detracts from the moral courage which Mr. Matunjwa showed in attempting to persuade the strikers to leave the copy on the 16th of August. When he would obtain no benefit from it, AMCU would obtain no benefit from it, and he risked being attacked as a sellout by going to the strikers and saying it's time to leave the copy and lay down your weapons. He showed considerable moral courage in doing so, and he ought to be congratulated for that. And I want to say that it does not lie in the mouths of those who did not lift a finger to prevent the catastrophe to criticize Mr. Matunjwa for his conduct. It's not for them to say that. They should be ashamed of themselves. If you ask who used their best endeavors, it was Mr. Matunjwa. No one else. Literally no one else that I can find. You can say really stretched and tried and hard and pushed. Only Mr. Matunjwa. So we criticize his evidence, but his conduct is with respect to be respected.
He was the only one who used the best endeavors. I'm not sure with respect that's correct. I think there's a lot to be said for what the stance, never mind some of the things he was perhaps persuaded to say, but the stance he took, General Mpembe, was also commendable.
Sir,
I thought you said the only one to use his best
to whom are you
endeavors
referring, Chair?
was General Mpembe. General Mpembe may have said things that he shouldn't have said in evidence, but he made the right decision on the 13th. I know the evidence leaders take a different view, but Mr. Mpofu takes the view that Professor I hold. And on the night of the 15th, he also expressed the view which is one which does him credit.
General Mpembe certainly did some things which are right. When Mr. Tokoto asked earlier in the hearing, did the police do anything right? He certainly did some things which were right. But there are things which we submitted he did wrong. And one of the things he did wrong was he didn't call off the operation as the overall commander after scene 1. He could have done it. I'm not going to retraverse that. I don't want to retraverse General Mpembe, though I think some people on our team would like me to. But He certainly did some things right. With the meeting that he had with NUM was sensible and wise. His decision not to confront the strikers initially on the 13th was sensible and wise. Unfortunately, he blotted his copybook rather badly, we say, in other respects. But I'm not going to go there. Then, Chair and Commissioners, may I say something very brief about the question.
Just before you leave it, Mr. Mpofu submitted that he was from a factual point of view, superseded as overall commander. I suppose you don't have to go there, but if that submission has some substance, then that detracts from the submission you made criticizing him.
Yes, if that's what he'd said. If he'd come and said, I couldn't stop it because it was taken away from me, control was taken away from me, then one could have dealt with that. But there was a closing of ranks, and he said, no one. He said, I took the decision.
Yeah. Some things which cause concern, but he
said
also
something
said through Mutunjwa, you talk to General Mbomba, I'm not in charge anymore.
Which he denies. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, give me credit for saying that to Mr. Mutunjwa, but I didn't say it. You can't.
If you find he did say it to Mutunjwa, you don't suggest that aspect of Mr. Mutunjwa's evidence is questionable and shouldn't be accepted.
No, it's entirely consistent with the known facts. Then can I come to the question of the memorial? We made the proposal in our written submissions that there should be some form of memorial. We left it open as to what that should be. It doesn't have to be a statue. There are many ways of memorializing an event. But we made the submission that there should be some memorializing of what happened, and that it must be that the memorial must be a memorial for all. It must be a part of the process of restoration and reconciliation, not a new source of division. If it is going to be a physical memorial, location is very important. And Mrs. Fundi has made the point to us that if the location is not acceptable to everyone, the memorial will not serve its purpose. And so both the process of identifying the memorial and the memorial itself have to be inclusive, part of a process of reconciliation. Otherwise, we will in fact reopen old wounds and reopen very deep wounds. Finally, in closing, Chair, may I say this. Lonman produced made available to the Commission the very interesting report of the Stonechild inquiry in Canada. And one of the conclusions of that Commission provides the appropriate response we submit to the SAPS, what SAPS did immediately after this catastrophe, namely close ranks. Immediately after the catastrophe, the Minister, the National Commissioner, and Brigadier Carlitz all announced that the police had acted correctly and told the police that they had acted correctly. And the passage in the Stonechild report, which we think is helpful, is at page 207. And this is what the report says. Quote, certainly, the Saskatoon Police Service must treat its members with respect and dignity and observe the procedural and substantive protections of the law. If, however, the Saskatoon Police Service becomes an advocate for its members, it assumes a role that is antithetical to its responsibility to the public. In assuming such a partisan rule, the Saskatoon Police Service contributes to a public perception that the police cannot police themselves and that complaints against the police are futile. That we submit as a very telling observation, which is very much applicable to the response what we have had in this Commission. Policing, chairperson and members of the Commission, is a difficult and sometimes very dangerous task, and Mr. Semenya is quite right in that regard. We all need the South African Police Service, and we desperately need a police service on which we can rely and which we can trust. The South African Police Service dogged denial that it did anything wrong, its invention of evidence, its concealment of evidence, and its attempts, now that those efforts have failed, to argue that the Commission may not make any meaningful findings and recommendations are not in the interests of the South African Police Service, and they are not in the interests of our country. It's time, Chairperson, for some accountability. It's time for a change, and it's time for a change from the top. those are our submissions, members of the Commission. Finally, may I take the liberty of speaking on behalf of all of us without a power of attorney I'm the shop steward, I'm told. I would like to take the liberty of thanking you, Commissioners, on behalf of all of us. We are all indebted to you for your patience, for your hard work, and for your commitment to finding the truth. And we wish you the best as you now undertake the task of producing your very important report. Thank you.
Before I say something, didn't you want to show us something about the position of the deaths? How long is that going to take? Have we got time for that?
We could, if we go quickly through it, it will take maybe 12 minutes.
I don't think we've got that, I'm afraid. But you said you'd give us copies of it later.
Can we give it an exhibit number so that it...
Ms. Pillay is in charge of that. She'll do it.
Quadruple Z49.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, for the last time, there are some things I want to say. I want to begin by thanking the municipalities of Rustenburg and Tshwane, which made venues available to the Commission free of charge and thus made a significant contribution to the Commission's work. I also want to express our gratitude to the officials of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development and the Secretariat of the Commission for all they've done to facilitate the working of the Commission. We're also grateful to the evidence leaders and their researchers for all the dedicated work they did to enable the Commission to carry out its functions. Also want to express our gratitude to the legal practitioners who represented the various parties who participated in the proceedings of the Commission. Thank them for their inputs, for their submissions, which I'm sure will contribute very significantly to a report which we hope will be of assistance not only to the people directly involved in the events of Marikana, but looking ahead to the country as a whole. It's also important to acknowledge the coverage given to the Commission's work by the media, who have enabled the public, both in this country and beyond our borders, to follow what has been happening at the Commission. We have on occasion found it necessary to engage with the witnesses in what might be considered a robust manner. This is being done in an effort to enable us to understand and evaluate the evidence and to decide what weight we can attach to the evidence. We, the Commissioners, will, as diligently as we can, consider all the evidence and all the arguments that we've heard before making our conclusions, before reaching our conclusions. I want to thank, as I've said, I want to thank all the people I've mentioned, and to say that it's ultimately been a much more harmonious Commission than I thought it would be at the beginning. I was very pleased to see where issues I won't go into, but by and large, the Commission has proceeded, all the people have taken part in a very harmonious way, and I think that also will be seen in the end to contribute to a satisfactory result as far as our work is concerned. And on that note, the Commission adjourns